Inspirational story, speech. A nurse whispered her secret feelings to a comatose patient, not knowing he. In a quiet hospital room where machines hummed softly and time moved slowly, a nurse named Amina sat beside a comatose patient whose eyes had not opened in months. The world outside spun with urgency, but in this sterile chamber, stillness ruled. Amina had cared for him every day, checking vitals, adjusting drips, cleaning wounds. But it was never just duty. There was something in the silence between them, something tender. As days blurred into nights, she began speaking softly to him, not as a nurse to a patient, but as a woman to a soul she couldn't stop thinking about. She would share stories from her childhood, tales of her dreams, and the loneliness she buried beneath her scrubs. And then, one evening, with the weight of unspoken emotion pressing against her heart, she whispered a truth. "I think I've fallen for you, and I don't know why. Maybe because when I care for you, I feel seen, even though you've never opened your eyes." She didn't know anyone heard her. The machines remained unchanged. The monitors blinked in rhythm, but something shifted. A hand twitched. A breath grew deeper. She told no one. Weeks later, he opened his eyes. Doctors called it a miracle. Science explained the recovery, but Amina stood quietly, heart pounding, realizing that her words, spoken with pure intention, had perhaps reached a place no medicine could. This story is not about romance, it's about the power of the human voice, the healing strength of emotional honesty, and the invisible threads that connect us all. To every caregiver, teacher, parent, and friend, speak kindly. Speak bravely. You never know who is listening, or how your truth might awaken life in another. Empathy is the cornerstone of caregiving. It is the silent, unwavering force that shapes every action of a nurse, doctor, or healthcare worker who chooses to step into another person's pain and stand there with them, not above them, not beyond them, but beside them. In the clinical world, where data, symptoms, and protocols dominate, empathy remains the invisible heartbeat of healing. For nurses in particular, empathy is not a task, it is a way of being. It is in the way they hold a hand during a painful procedure, the way they adjust a pillow without being asked, or the way they notice when a patient's silence is heavier than usual. Unlike sympathy, which recognizes another's suffering from a distance, empathy walks into the room, sits down, and says, "I see you. I feel this with you." That moment, that human connection, is when caregiving transcends the technical and enters the sacred. In a busy hospital ward, full of alarms, medications, and time constraints, empathy is often the only thing that reminds both patient and caregiver that they are human first. Nurses are trained to observe, to measure, to treat. But more than that, they are taught to listen. Not just to the sounds, but to the silences. Not just to the symptoms, but to the stories beneath them. An empathetic nurse knows when a patient needs more than medicine. They recognize when someone is scared but doesn't say it, when someone misses their family but tries to act strong, or when someone wants to give up but is waiting for permission to hold on just a little longer. In many situations, a nurse becomes the most constant presence in a patient's life, especially those who are critically ill or isolated. In such cases, empathy becomes the bridge between suffering and hope. It helps patients feel heard, not just monitored. It helps them feel valued, not just charted. It is empathy that often gives a patient the strength to fight, even when the odds are against them. Furthermore, empathy has a profound effect on the caregiver themselves. It transforms routine into meaning, burnout into purpose, and emotional exhaustion into deeper connection. Nurses who lead with empathy are not just performing tasks, they are giving parts of themselves over and over in a way that creates ripple effects of compassion across their teams, their patients, and even their communities. But empathy is not without its challenges. It requires emotional labor that is often unseen and unrecognized. It demands vulnerability, which many in the medical field are taught to suppress in favor of objectivity. Yet, the most effective nurses are those who find a way to balance both clinical detachment and emotional closeness. They learn to open their hearts without losing themselves, to feel deeply without drowning. This balance is critical because empathy, when practiced with boundaries, does not weaken a nurse. It strengthens them. It becomes a protective force that not only shields patients from isolation, but shields caregivers from becoming hardened or disconnected. It is this emotional intelligence, the ability to tune into the feelings of another and respond authentically, that defines the best in healthcare. In essence, empathy is not just about what you do for someone, it's about how you do it, why you do it, and who you become in the process. In every whispered encouragement, in every act of quiet presence, and in every moment when a nurse chooses to connect rather than just care, empathy is the thread that ties together science and soul. When a nurse whispers to a comatose patient, it is empathy that gives her voice purpose. She doesn't know if he hears, but she speaks anyway, because in her heart, she knows that even the smallest act of connection can carry immeasurable healing power. Unspoken connections can be powerful. In a world where words dominate communication, we often underestimate the depth of meaning that silence can carry. Yet in the quiet moments, when eyes meet without words, when a hand gently brushes another, or when a presence lingers without explanation, there lies a form of communication that is more honest, more profound, and often more healing than anything spoken aloud. Nurses, especially, live within this realm every day. Their work is full of moments where words are absent, either because patients cannot speak, or because emotions are too deep to name. In those moments, a nurse's ability to connect silently becomes a lifeline. These silent connections are not accidents. They are formed from attention, sensitivity, and emotional intelligence. A nurse doesn't need to be told that a patient is scared. She senses it in their eyes. She doesn't need words to know when someone is in pain, confused, or overwhelmed. She reads it in posture, breath, and energy. This awareness enables her to respond not only medically, but emotionally, to offer comfort with a look, assurance with a gesture, and presence with her time. There is something sacred in being understood without needing to explain yourself. For patients, especially those who are vulnerable or unable to speak, due to coma, illness, or trauma, these unspoken connections can mean the difference between feeling invisible and feeling human. When a nurse treats them not as tasks to complete, but as souls to connect with, healing begins on a level that no chart or test can measure. The warmth of a shared glance, the feeling that someone cares without needing anything in return, offers a kind of hope that cannot be prescribed. These unspoken moments are not confined to critical care. They appear throughout the nursing profession. A child frightened before surgery who calms when the nurse gently takes their hand. An elderly patient with dementia who recognizes the nurse's kindness even if they forget her name. A grieving family member who doesn't speak but finds solace in the quiet companionship of someone simply sitting beside them. In all these examples, there is a thread that binds people beyond language: presence, intention, compassion. Such moments also affect the caregivers deeply. Nurses remember the patients who never spoke but taught them the most. They carry with them the expressions, the silences, the invisible exchanges that shaped who they are. These unspoken bonds are what keep many nurses grounded when the job becomes too clinical, too chaotic, or too heavy. They remind them that they are not just delivering care, they are delivering humanity. Moreover, science increasingly supports the value of emotional connection in healing. Studies show that patients who feel emotionally supported often recover faster, manage pain better, and experience fewer complications. While medicine repairs the body, it is empathy and connection, often unspoken, that tend to the heart and mind. A simple act of kindness, though it may seem small, can shift a patient's outlook and ignite a will to live that might otherwise fade in despair. It's important to understand that the strongest connections are not always formed through loud declarations or detailed conversations. Sometimes they are born in the stillness between two people, where emotions resonate more deeply than words ever could. For a nurse whispering to a comatose patient, the connection may feel one-sided, but science has shown that even those in comas may hear and register voices and emotions. The truth is, The human spirit responds to love in all forms, even when it is not conscious in the way we expect. So, when we consider the power of unspoken connections, especially in the field of caregiving, we begin to appreciate a deeper layer of healing, one that goes beyond procedures and treatment plans. It is in the silent prayers, the gentle touches, and the whispered truths that the real work of care happens. These quiet moments are not empty. They are full of presence, meaning, and healing potential. In the end, words may fade, but the feeling of being understood, even silently, lasts forever. Hope thrives in uncertainty. It is in the most uncertain, frightening, and unpredictable moments that hope often plants its quiet seeds, sometimes without us even realizing it. In hospitals, where outcomes are never guaranteed, and where every day may bring either recovery or decline, hope becomes a constant companion, even if it is never explicitly mentioned. For nurses and caregivers, witnessing this delicate balance between uncertainty and belief is part of their daily reality. They see how, even when a prognosis is poor, the human spirit often clings to something beyond logic, a sense that healing is still possible, that miracles can happen, that light exists even when the way is dark. Patients often experience deep uncertainty, especially those who are unconscious, critically ill, or facing long-term treatments. Their bodies may be still, but inside them may reside a quiet will to survive, a tiny spark that refuses to go out. That spark is hope, not always spoken, not always obvious, but alive nonetheless. Nurses become the guardians of that hope. They hold it gently when the family can no longer speak it. They nourish it through acts of compassion, through consistent care, through small gestures that remind everyone involved that life is still happening, even here. Hope in the face of uncertainty is not denial. It does not ignore the facts or pretend that risks do not exist. Instead, it exists alongside reality. It says, yes, this is hard. Yes, the future is unknown. But let us keep trying anyway. This kind of hope gives people the strength to endure the painful and unpredictable path of illness and recovery. It keeps the heart soft when the world feels cold. It allows a nurse to whisper to a patient who hasn't moved in weeks, believing that, somehow, her words might still matter. In medical settings where science guides decisions, hope is not always easy to quantify. You can measure heart rate, oxygen levels, and neurological responses, but you cannot measure the quiet determination in a patient's soul. Yet again and again, nurses witness moments that defy medical expectations, patients who awaken when they were not expected to, patients who begin to heal just when everyone had prepared to say goodbye. These moments are reminders that hope, even when invisible, is not useless. It is often the very thing that fuels the fight to keep going. Uncertainty, for most people, is frightening. Not knowing what comes next can cause despair, anxiety, and paralysis. But for those who embrace hope, uncertainty becomes a space of possibility. It is where prayers are whispered, where courage is found, and where unexpected strength emerges. A nurse sitting quietly beside a silent patient may not know what tomorrow holds, but she continues to show up, to care, to believe. That is hope in action. That is strength in softness. Hope also has a contagious quality. When a nurse or caregiver believes, even quietly, even gently, it can influence the mood and mindset of patients and families. A calm tone of voice, a reassuring presence, a gentle smile. These things are not medically prescribed, but they can soothe the soul in ways that medicine cannot. In environments filled with fear and doubt, hope spreads through kindness, compassion, and the willingness to keep showing up even when nothing is certain. For the nurse who whispered her feelings to a comatose patient, hope lived in her voice. She did not know if he could hear. She did not know if he would survive, but she spoke anyway, because hope does not always need evidence to exist. Sometimes it just needs faith, a belief that the smallest act of love might create a ripple that leads to healing. And sometimes that belief becomes the very thing that calls someone back to life, Hope, then, is not a naive illusion. It is a quiet resilience that rises each day, despite fear. It is the unseen companion in every hospital room, the invisible thread between caregivers and patients. And though uncertainty is inevitable, so too is the power of hope to grow within it. Healing is not just medical, it's human. While modern medicine offers remarkable tools for diagnosis, treatment, and recovery, true healing often requires much more than procedures and prescriptions. It involves the unseen elements of care, emotional connection, compassion, understanding, and presence. These human factors, often delivered most consistently by nurses, are not supplemental to healing, they are central to it. Healing begins when a person feels safe, seen, and valued. Medicine may treat the illness, but it is humanity that treats the soul. When a nurse walks into a patient's room, she is not just entering a space filled with medical charts and machines. She is stepping into a deeply personal chapter of someone's life. That patient may be frightened, disoriented, grieving, or in pain. While medicine can address symptoms, it is the nurse's tone of voice, the warmth of her hands, and the sincerity of her gaze that begin to restore the person inside the patient. Healing requires this recognition that the body and spirit are interconnected and both need care. In countless hospital rooms, healing begins not with a pill, but with a presence. A nurse sits beside a patient who hasn't spoken in days. She gently straightens the blankets, speaks softly about the weather or their family, and offers a moment of silence filled with respect. She may never receive a response, but her presence is an act of healing. It tells the patient, "You matter, I am here, you are not alone." These messages are powerful, especially when delivered through empathy and consistency. Science supports this truth. Studies show that patients who feel emotionally supported recover more quickly, tolerate pain better, and have lower rates of complications. Healing, then, is not just about the elimination of disease, it is about the restoration of wholeness. That wholeness includes emotional well-being, dignity, trust, and hope. Nurses foster this every day in their interactions, often in small ways that go unnoticed. Remembering a patient's name, listening without rushing, or showing patience with someone who is scared or confused. There are also moments when healing does not mean curing. In cases where recovery is not possible, healing becomes about comfort, closure, and peace. Nurses play a vital role here too. They help patients and families navigate grief, manage pain, and find meaning even in the face of death. These moments are no less sacred, and the humanity shown in them often leaves lasting impressions on families for the rest of their lives. Healing, then, is not just about saving life, it is about honoring life. Nurses often carry the dual responsibility of clinical accuracy and emotional intelligence. They must chart every medication, monitor every symptom, and stay alert for changes. Yet at the same time, they must remain open-hearted, willing to feel, to connect, and to care deeply. This balance between science and humanity is what makes nursing a form of both art and medicine. It is this balance that allows a nurse to whisper to a patient who hasn't moved, to believe in their value even when no one else does. When a nurse whispered her feelings to a comatose patient, she wasn't treating him with medicine, she was treating him with humanity. She didn't know if he could hear her, she didn't know if it would matter. But she understood that healing often begins in the unseen layers of the heart. Her words were not just confessions, they were offerings of comfort, of truth, of connection. In that quiet moment, she reminded him, and perhaps herself, that love is also a form of care, and that the human touch can be as powerful as any drug. In every hospital, there are stories like this, stories where healing happened not because of what was done, but because of how it was done. Where someone held on because they felt loved, where a caregiver's humanity helped pull a patient back from despair. These stories are not written in medical records, but they live in the memories of those who experienced them. True healing is deeply human. It lives in presence, in empathy, and in the belief that every person is more than their illness. And it is in that belief that real miracles begin. Professional boundaries and personal emotions are two forces that constantly intersect in the life of a nurse. Nursing is a field deeply rooted in human interaction, which means that every day, nurses walk a delicate line between maintaining professional objectivity and offering genuine compassion. The emotional environment of healthcare can be intense and unpredictable, full of pain, fear, hope, and loss. While professional boundaries are crucial to ethical care, it's impossible to deny that nurses are still human beings, carrying their own emotions, vulnerabilities, and stories into their work. The reality is that caring deeply is both a strength and a challenge in this profession. From the first day of training, nurses are taught to maintain boundaries with their patients. These boundaries exist for many reasons: to ensure clear thinking, to protect both the caregiver and the patient, and to uphold ethical standards. A nurse must remain calm in crisis, avoid favoritism, and make decisions based on clinical need, not personal attachment. However, real-world nursing often introduces emotional complexities that textbooks cannot fully prepare one for. When you care for someone day after day, witness their suffering, hold their hand through fear, and see their family cry at the bedside, emotional walls begin to thin. It's no longer just a professional interaction. It becomes a human relationship. Many nurses feel torn between doing their jobs well and honoring their emotional responses, feeling sadness when a patient passes, joy when someone recovers, or even deep affection for a long-term patient is not weakness, it is the price of empathy. Emotions, when managed properly, do not cloud judgment, they enrich it. A nurse who cares deeply is often more attuned to subtle changes, more motivated to go the extra mile, and more trusted by patients. The challenge is learning how to feel without being overwhelmed, how to give without depleting oneself. Personal emotions can also arise unexpectedly, such as when a patient reminds a nurse of a loved one, or when a shared cultural or personal background creates a deeper bond. Sometimes, feelings grow slowly, over weeks or months of care. In rare but real situations, nurses find themselves emotionally attached, even falling in love, as was the case with the nurse who whispered her secret feelings to a comatose patient. She likely didn't plan it, didn't expect it. It simply grew, nurtured by time, silence, and a one-way connection that became deeply personal. This doesn't mean she violated her role. It means she experienced what many caregivers do at some point, a moment when the heart becomes involved. In such situations, self-awareness and integrity are key. Nurses must be able to recognize their emotions, reflect on them, and decide how to act in a way that still respects the patient and maintains ethical boundaries. Speaking feelings aloud, as the nurse did in that quiet room, might have been less about expecting a response and more about releasing something she had held in for too long. It was an honest moment between her heart and his presence, made all the more poignant by the fact that he could not respond. Balancing professional boundaries and personal emotions is not about choosing one over the other. It is about understanding that both are real and necessary. Boundaries protect the nurse and the patient. Emotions remind us that we are human. The best nurses are not those who shut off their feelings, but those who know how to feel with responsibility. They cry in break rooms, smile behind masks, and return to their patients with full hearts and steady hands. In a world that often demands emotional detachment in the name of professionalism, nursing stands out as a profession where feeling is not a flaw. It is a vital skill. The key is not to suppress emotions, but to manage them with grace. This emotional intelligence is what allows nurses to deliver care that is not only effective, but deeply compassionate. And in moments of stillness, like when one nurse whispered her heart to a silent patient, those emotions become a powerful reminder of the humanity that exists in every act of healing. Vulnerability is often misunderstood. In many areas of life, especially in professions that require strength, responsibility, and leadership, vulnerability is seen as a weakness, something to be hidden or overcome. But in the context of healthcare, and especially in nursing, vulnerability is not only unavoidable, it is a quiet source of strength. When a nurse whispers her secret feelings to a comatose patient, she is not breaking down, she is opening up. She is showing that beneath the uniform, beyond the clinical expertise, there is a human heart that cares deeply. That moment of honesty reveals how vulnerability can become a bridge between people, even when one of them cannot respond. In healthcare environments, patients are always vulnerable. They lie in beds with their bodies exposed, their fears close to the surface, and their control stripped away. They are dependent on others for their survival and dignity. Nurses are trained to support them, to offer strength and stability, but the truth is, nurses also carry their own forms of vulnerability. They absorb the pain of others, witness death, face moral dilemmas, and work under extreme emotional pressure. They see things that most people could not bear to see. And yet, they return each day, not because they are immune to the weight of it all, but because they have accepted that vulnerability is part of the work. What makes this vulnerability powerful is the courage it takes to stay open-hearted in an environment full of suffering. It's much easier to build emotional walls, to treat patients like tasks, to avoid eye contact, to stay busy and detached. But when a nurse allows herself to feel, to care, to weep in private after a hard shift, she is not being unprofessional. She is being deeply human, and that humanity is what patients remember. They may forget the names of medicines, but they never forget the nurse who treated them with real compassion. Vulnerability also allows for connection. When people sense that someone is being genuine with them, not just going through the motions, they respond differently. Even patients in the deepest states of unconsciousness may respond to tone, emotion, and presence. There is growing scientific evidence that comatose patients may register voices and emotional cues on some level. When the nurse whispered her feelings to the patient, she may have thought she was speaking into silence, but it's possible, just possible, that he felt something shift, that he heard her or felt her presence and held on a little longer. In moments of emotional exposure, nurses also come to understand themselves more deeply. They learn what they value, what they fear, what they are capable of. Vulnerability becomes a mirror that reflects their inner landscape. It makes them better listeners, more intuitive caregivers, and stronger advocates for their patients. It also reminds them that they too deserve care, that burnout and emotional fatigue are real, and that healing the healer is just as important. In leadership and training, the concept of vulnerability-based trust is often emphasized. Teams that allow vulnerability are stronger because people are not afraid to admit mistakes, ask for help, or show their emotions. Nursing teams that embrace vulnerability create safer, more compassionate environments not only for patients but for each other. This collective empathy builds resilience. It makes it possible for nurses to keep giving, even when their hearts are tired. The nurse's whispered confession may seem like a small moment, but in reality, it is a window into the deeper truth of care work. That we are all in some way vulnerable, that we all carry hopes, regrets, dreams, and longings. And that sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is to let ourselves be seen, to speak even when we are unsure, to care even when it hurts, to love even when there may never be a response. This is the paradox of nursing, to be strong enough to face suffering and soft enough to be moved by it. Vulnerability does not weaken that strength, it defines it. In allowing her heart to speak in that quiet room, the nurse showed that true strength is not in hiding our feelings, but in honoring them. Through that act of truth, she reminded us all that vulnerability, when embraced with courage, becomes the very soul of healing. Love, in its purest form, transcends spoken words, conscious awareness, and even physical responses. It exists beyond the confines of what is logical or measurable. In a hospital room, where machines beep and silence often speaks louder than language, love can still find its way, quietly, powerfully, and without needing validation. When a nurse whispered her secret feelings to a comatose patient, she did so knowing that she may never hear a reply, but she also knew that love is not always about being heard. Sometimes it is about simply being present, about giving without condition, about honoring connection in its most vulnerable form. In healthcare, love is not often a word used in charts or clinical discussions. Yet, it is one of the most powerful forces at play in the healing process. Patients who feel loved, by family, by caregivers, or even by strangers, tend to show greater resilience. Their emotional well-being improves, their fear diminishes, and they often find reasons to hold on when their bodies are ready to give up. Nurses, who spend long hours at the bedside, become witnesses to this truth. They see how a loving touch can calm a racing heart, how a kind word can lift a spirit, and how a presence, just being there, can make all the difference. Love expressed in silence is one of the most intimate acts of human connection. It requires no performance, no acknowledgement. It is not about outcomes, it is about intention. The nurse, speaking softly to a patient who cannot respond, pours out her heart not for reward or recognition, but because she feels something real, something worth expressing. That expression becomes an act of faith, a belief that love matters, even when it cannot be confirmed. In doing so, she redefines communication, not as a transaction of words, but as the offering of soul to soul. In many cultures, it is believed that people in comas or unconscious states are still capable of hearing, feeling, or sensing on a deep level. Families are often encouraged to speak to their loved ones, to play familiar music, or to maintain gentle touch. Whether science fully explains it or not, countless stories exist of patients who later awaken and recall voices, sensations, or emotions they felt during their unconscious state. Love then becomes more than an emotional gesture. It becomes a possible lifeline, a whisper that keeps the person tethered to the world. There is also great bravery in loving someone who may never be able to love you back. This kind of love is unconditional. It is selfless, vulnerable, and healing in its own right. It is a reminder that love is not always about reciprocation. It is about expression. The nurse's love was not about possession or expectation. It was about acknowledging what was in her heart and offering it in the most human way possible. That act, though private and fragile, was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. In the broader context of healthcare, love shows up in small ways every day. In the way nurses advocate for patients when no one else is watching. In the way caregivers learn about someone's favorite music or bring them flowers on a difficult day. These are not required acts. They are expressions of love, a wordless compassion that fills the sterile rooms with warmth and meaning. These moments may not be recorded, but they are deeply felt, and they often linger in memory long after discharge or even after death. The love the nurse whispered into that quiet room was a powerful declaration of humanity. It was proof that feelings do not need permission to exist. They do not need to be practical or explained. They simply are. And in expressing her love, she gave herself permission to be real, to be vulnerable, and to be true to what she felt. That honesty, spoken into silence, was more than enough. It was healing. It was courageous. It was beautiful. Love, ultimately, is what makes caregiving more than just a profession. It is what transforms duty into devotion and routine into grace. And when love is spoken, even into the stillness of a coma, it leaves its mark, not just on the patient, but on the one who dares to speak it.